Hey everybody, welcome back to Historical-ish. This is episode 9 of the Ancient Mysteries Iceberg. In this part, we'll be going over the first half of Tier 5, so if you haven't seen any of the other episodes, definitely check those out in this playlist. For these last two tiers, I will definitely be going more in-depth into these topics, so the videos might be a little bit longer, but I think y'all really enjoy these topics because there's stuff that I've never even heard about. Also, I do apologize for how long this video has taken to get out. I have been pretty busy, and it also doesn't help that I record and edit on a 2010 MacBook, so it definitely takes a lot longer to do that. And before I start, I just want to say thank you to everyone that watches. It's been fantastic, so I hope y'all enjoy. Number 1, Adam's Bridge. Adam's Bridge, also known as Rama's Bridge, is a chain of limestone shoals between Pamban Island off the southeastern coast of Tamil Nadu, India, and Mannar Island off the western coast of Sri Lanka. Geological evidence suggests that this bridge is a former land connection between India and Sri Lanka. The Western world came to know of the bridge via the Book of Roads and Kingdoms, in which it is referred to as the Set Bandi, or the Bridge of the Sea. Some early Islamic sources refer to a mountain within Sri Lanka as Adam's Peak, which is the location Adam arrived at after being cast out of Eden. And these sources describe Adam crossing the bridge from Sri Lanka into India after his expulsion, leading to the name Adam's Bridge. The earliest known source to call it Adam's Bridge is around 1030 AD and is probably the first to describe the bridge in this manner. And in 1804, a British cartographer created the first map which calls this area by the name Adam's Bridge. In Hindu traditions, the Sanskrit epic, the Ramayana, says that the bridge was a god-made structure made by the Lord Rama to defeat the evil demon king Ravana. The evil king held Lord Rama's wife in the island fortress, and the island was unable to be attacked or defeated. Rama's monkeys, or ape-like creatures known as Varanas, helped him build the bridge and defeat the evil king. There is some controversy around this, though, as modern popular belief tie the location of Lanka in the Ramayana to the island of Sri Lanka, although many scholars believe that there is an explicit distinction between the two due to Sanskrit sources from the first millennium mentioning both as separate locations. These scholars that do believe there is a distinction put the location of the original Lanka in the eastern part of the present-day Madhya Pradesh. The bridge itself consists of 103 tiny reefs and sandbanks that remained passable at low tide until finally in 1480 a tropical storm destroyed portions of it that now make it impassable on land. In general, there is a large dispute between the Hindu belief, the Islamic belief, and the proposed geological explanations. Some of these geological explanations include the bridge being formed due to the accretion of sediment in the channel, leading to it being blocked over a long period of time, or that Sri Lanka was originally part of the Indian mainland, with it slowly being separated over time. But according to our knowledge of the seafloors and tectonic activity, we don't have conclusive scientific evidence about how the land bridge was originally formed. Professor S.M. Ramasamy has conducted tests that concluded that the bridge was formed 3,500 years ago by ocean currents. This would put the creation of the bridge during the era of the Ramayana story and has given some people proof of that legend. One piece of evidence that people point to who believe that this bridge is man-made is that layers of coral are placed upon loose sand, which does not occur naturally, and for coral to be here would be quite unexpected. Obviously, I'm a big fan of myths and stories being explanations for things that people were unable to comprehend, but the controversy and mystery here definitely raises some questions about this famous bridge and doesn't point to one theory to be the most correct. Number 2, Laos's Plain of Jars. The Plain of Jars is a megalithic landscape located within Laos that consists of thousands of giant stone jars arranged in clusters ranging from one jar to several hundred. These jars were put in place as early as 1240 BC to 660 BC. They range from 1 to 3 yards high and each weigh up to 14 tons, which is unbelievable. There are over 90 jar sites that have been identified, and out of those 90 sites, only one jar at one site has been found to actually have been decorated. This jar depicts a frogman carved onto the base, and connections to the frogman rock painting at Huashan, China have been drawn. Only a few of the jars have stone lids, which leads experts to believe that the bulk of the jars had lids, but were made of materials which were perishable. Stone discs have been found near the jars, which cover or mark a burial pit, but are significantly more rare than the jars themselves. The majority of the stones are limestone, and it is believed that the people who created them used iron chisels, although there's no conclusive evidence to support this. Regional differences in jar shape exist, and while some of this can be attributed to the rock type, a few variations seem to be unique to a few sites. Researchers believe these jars are associated with burial practices due to the discovery of human remains, burial goods, and ceramic all around the fields that hold the jars. Another commonly accepted belief is that because these are fields found all over Southeast Asia, they may have had links to a trade route that stored water in the jars from the monsoon seasons to refuel the travelers and the merchants. It seems like every ancient civilization that I come across has a legend of giants, because local legends suggest that these were created by Khun Cheung, an ancient king of giants who lived in the Laos highlands area. The legend says that after winning a long and arduous battle, he created the jars to brew enormous amounts of celebratory rice wine. Unfortunately, between May of 1964 and the summer of 1969, the Plain of Jars was included in the area that was heavily bombed by the U.S. Air Force, with many of the jars being destroyed, broken, or even displaced. For the sites that do remain, many efforts to clear the land of the unexploded cluster bombs have been made to make a small number of sites safe to visit. Finally, in 2019, the Plain of Jars was made a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This would definitely make a very weird and unique burial tradition, so I like to think that the giants is a lot more fun of a theory, but there's way too much evidence to dismiss the burial site. Number 3, Polynesia's sweet potatoes. When Captain Cook arrived in Polynesia in the 18th century, the sweet potato was already widespread and a staple within the region. This fact began to support the theory that Polynesian voyagers had made contact with South Americans and brought the sweet potato back to be cultivated in their homelands. And with some other archaeological and DNA evidence, this theory of pre-Columbian contact between the two cultures seemed extremely plausible. But a new study was done suggesting that the split in DNA from both the Polynesian and South American sweet potato lineages happened over 100,000 years ago. This could suggest a couple of things. Humans must have not been responsible for this according to mainstream thought of human history, and this means that the seeds were carried over the Pacific by birds. And they also discovered that the sweet potato seeds will still sprout if they've been exposed to seawater, which means they could have also floated to Polynesia. This also does raise some other questions. If it happened once, why didn't it happen again? Was there only one isolated subspecies 100,000 years ago? Maybe it suggests people were indeed responsible and that they did in fact live and trade over 100,000 years ago. There has been a lot of debate over that study of the sweet potato DNA, and many of the scientists claim that it was not handled correctly and would like to see it replicated in various other studies. I personally believe that there's a lot more evidence to support that the Polynesians and South Americans had made contact and traded. DNA from 107 people from 14 different Polynesian islands and Pacific coastal countries from Mexico to Chile were examined, and it was discovered that people from 4 island sites in French Polynesia bore DNA indicative of interbreeding with South Americans most closely related to present-day indigenous Colombians at or around 1200 AD. This study left open the question of who traveled which direction, but it is safe to point to the Polynesians with their well-known travels all over Oceania. It is pretty crazy that the sweet potato has shaped our understanding of human history and has raised many questions about the past 100,000 years on who made contact with who and what humans were actually able to achieve during this time span. Number 4, the lost city of Dvaraka. Dvaraka is located 310 miles north of Mumbai, India, on the western coast. This city is a busy port town, and apparently it has been built on top of the ancient and mystical city of Dvaraka. This is where the royal home of Lord Krishna and the gateway to heaven are. Dvaraka is derived from the older name of Dvaraka, which itself means gateway to heaven. And legend says that the present city is the 7th one on the original site, and actually still has an ancient temple on that site that is a major religious center and pilgrimage destination. According to Hindu texts, Lord Krishna, the 8th avatar of Vishnu, is said to have built this great city and resided within. It is said that Krishna was born in Mathura in Uttar Pradesh, which is in the east at the foothills of the Himalayas. His uncle Kansa was known as a tyrannical ruler who was then overthrown and killed by Krishna. The father-in-law of Kansa swore vengeance on Krishna and attacked the city of Mathura 17 times, but did not succeed as the city held off each attack. Krishna realized that his people could not take much more from this, and thus left Mathura and founded the ancient city of Dvaraka. It was in this city that Krishna would live the rest of his life and eventually die by accidentally being shot by an arrow while meditating under a tree. To create this city, Lord Krishna rose a huge swath of land from the seabed for the foundation of the city. The city was built with the help of Hindu gods and demigods. The god of the sea, Sumadradev, gave him 283 square miles of land out of the sea for the city. The city was believed to be full of sounds of the calling of cranes and swans, along with bees and birds. It was said to be a very peaceful place. And because this was a port city in ancient times too, the city was extremely wealthy. It's said to have had over 900,000 royal palaces. That's an incredible amount. They were all built with crystal, gold, silver, and even emeralds, and it's said that this was a place of paradise. Maybe it really was a gateway to heaven, maybe it was Eden. Also, according to legend, the city was destroyed by a massive flood, but even the ancient temple I mentioned earlier, only dated back to 2,500 years ago, that was destroyed in antiquity, and what stands now is from the 16th century. So we have to go back a little bit further. What's really interesting is that they found ruins and stones from a city that date back to 9,000 years ago to about 7,000 BC off the coast of the present-day city. This could mean that the original city of Dvaraka could have in fact been a real place and yet another city destroyed by the rising sea levels after the end of the Ice Age. This would be yet another clue that ancient civilizations were in fact a lot more advanced during this time than previously thought, with examples of pillars, roads, and even foundations of buildings being excavated from under the sea. Number 5. The White Shaman Mural. In southwest Texas, about a mile upstream from where the Pecos River empties into the Rio Grande, there is a small alcove within the limestone that houses some very interesting art. The 26-foot-long collection of pictographs is known as the White Shaman Rock Shelter. Although the pigments have faded over time, during certain parts of the day, notably at sunset, the light intensifies the colors of red and yellow, allowing for a clearer view and depiction of the figures. These figures range from abstract to even human and animal-related figures. Although this is the most well-known site, it isn't the only one. Within a 90-mile radius, there are more than 200 rock shelters with various sized rock art, which all fall under the branch of the Pecos River style art. The people who created these works of art are thought to have lived between 2500 BC and 500 BC, and lived as hunter-gatherers in the area. The mystery here deals with what these pictographs actually represent. Originally, they were believed to be created by shamans in order to recreate hallucinogenic experiences, and more recently, an archaeologist by the name of Carolyn Boyd has put forth that they contain the history and belief of these ancient people. Through years of study, she realized that most of the Pecos-style rock art is separated into 3 distinct tiers. She thinks they represent the underworld, the world itself, and the world above, similar to the belief system and structure of the Mesoamericans, which isn't a surprise considering populations all over the world and throughout history have shared common belief structures and systems when coming in contact with one another. In the 1930s, at a site very close to White Shaman, archaeologists uncovered a mixture of peyote and other plants which were formed together to form discs. These discs could coincide with the discs found in the White Shaman artwork, and this whole piece could be a way to represent how to correctly have a peyote ritual in order to communicate with the heavens. Obviously, it is extremely difficult and almost impossible to decipher what the culture was actually implying when making this rock art, but it is incredible the stuff that we've learned about this specific culture by studying these various rock-style art. Number 6. The tunnels at Baiae. So these are a series of tunnels and caves in modern-day Italy, just north of the Bay of Naples. The story says that a woman named Amalthea, who lurked in the caves, was so beautiful that she attracted the sun god Apollo. He offered her one wish in exchange for her virginity, and she wished for an endless life, but did not clarify that she wouldn't age, so she got really old but couldn't die. She continued living in the cave and eventually said that the cave itself concealed an entrance to the underworld. So what makes this story pretty fascinating is that the Temple of Jupiter was built on top of it, so it looks like it was somewhat similar to the Oracle of Delphi. And there were scrolls that were kept underneath the temple in case of times of crisis, as essentially a manual that set out rituals that needed to be performed to avoid disasters. Apparently it worked pretty well until the temple was burnt down in 83 BC, and the scrolls were finally destroyed completely in 405. These scrolls listed an Oracle of the Dead, and many believe that the caves at Baiae were the entrance to that and to Hades. What's also pretty interesting is that two men who lived at a NATO airbase around the area, whose hobbies were excavating, sought out to find the real-life entrance to the underworld, or the Cave of Sibyl. They made it to this cave that went roughly 10 feet down in its first 400 feet of length, and notably they said the entrance was aligned with the summer solstice. Then the cave suddenly changes directions to a straight east-west, aligning with the equinoctial sunrise line. This suggests that it was a temple of some kind and served some ritual purpose. Paget and Jones noted in the deeper level of the caves that there were some spots spaced 1 yard apart on each wall, seemingly for oil-burning lamps, which also strengthens the idea that it was used ceremoniously and often. They then found at its deepest point an almost boiling stream that ran left to right across the tunnel floor of sulfurous water. They then went further and found a chamber that was oriented to the helical sunset. They believed that the tunnels and caves were constructed to mimic the idea of going into the underworld and crossing the river Styx, which led to Hades. The chamber that was supposed to mimic Hades also had a secret passage that could be traveled quicker than going along the river and through the S-turn tunnels. So this may have just been a hoax by priests around 550 BC and onward, which this is estimated to be constructed at that era, to get people to believe that Hades actually existed. We're not quite sure whether the theory that it was supposed to represent Hades or the theory that they believed that it was Hades is truth. But another question does come up. How did these people know that there was a river of boiling sulfuric water under the hill? There's no steam and hot stream that arises from it. The stream, after being color dyed to test where it ends up, comes out into the ocean miles from the tunnels. It's really interesting thinking about how these people knew where the river was and knew to build a tunnel directly and perfectly into it. Now, it could also have been naturally occurring tunnels, but to have them line up perfectly is quite a coincidence. Number 7, the Herto Man. The Herto Man is the remains of a human found in modern-day Ethiopia. The bones date back to about 160,000 years ago and were uncovered from the sedimentary deposits of the Buri Formation in 1997 by Tim White. This was a very significant find during the time, since there was a massive gap in our knowledge of human history and the fossil record from 300,000 to around 100,000 years ago. Since he falls just on the edge of what we consider to be modern humans, they've named him as a Homo sapien idaltu, which means elder in the native Afar language. The skull holds a brain volume of 88 cubic inches compared to us at 92, suggesting that he and the others of the same species didn't have the brain capacity that we do today, but they were closer than many other older remains found from the Homo branch. Many think this could be the missing link between older Homo species and us, but this is not concrete truth though. In the original paper published by Tim White, they looked at the earliest remains found, which were from South Africa, and compared the bone structures and were able to come to the conclusion that the idaltu is a separate subspecies of the Homo sapiens branch. Another paper published at the same time by Chris Stringer notes that this was the wrong conclusion drawn, as he compared the bones to those found in Australasia, which dated back to the late Pleistocene. Tim White did consider this option, but more research done in 2011 and 2014 with much larger sample sizes shows how similar the skull shapes are for many remains found across the globe, and puts the idea that the Herto Man as a distinct subspecies under question. They've also found markings on the bones too, and due to how precise they are, this suggests burial rituals rather than cannibalism, which would be the oldest date if confirmed. Which, again, suggests that they were far more intelligent than we previously believed. And I know we keep going back to that humans are far more intelligent for a lot longer time than we think now, but I think a lot of evidence points that way. Also, as a side note, I do think it would be really interesting to live in a time period where there were multiple species of hominins all across the globe, and to see what it was like to have these species come in contact with each other and how that played out. Number 8, the hanging coffins of China. So the hanging coffins of China are found all over southern and especially southwestern China towards the Himalayas. These are essentially coffins placed up on the side of cliffs or within caverns within the side of high cliffs. Nobody knows why these people used to bury the dead up on the sides of cliffs, and a lot of questions surround the how and why. For the how aspect, nobody knows if they were raised up to the sides of the cliff or if they were lowered down. Obviously, researchers now, when they go to study these graves, they will rappel down, but obviously 3,000 years ago, when the oldest one can be dated back to, I don't think that they had the technology to be able to rappel down with a coffin and place it in the side of a cliff, but who knows. As for the why, many assume that the bodies were put up on the side of cliffs to get the bodies away from animals who might try to scavenge them. But I highly doubt they would go through the effort of putting them hundreds of feet in the air for that reason instead of just burying them. Others think that the higher the bodies were buried, the more significant and important that ancestor or person was. Maybe they could get a jump start at heaven by being buried higher in the area. We just don't know. We don't know which tribe they were from, but we can estimate that they are at most 3,000 years old, and we don't have much evidence surrounding them other than the grave sites themselves. Locals apparently believe that these people used to be able to fly, which is how they explain how they got them up there. So maybe they came from a people who could fly and they just didn't know how to anymore. Number 9, the Land of Punt. Also known as God's Land, Punt is a faraway realm that was rich in incense, ebony, and gold. The Egyptians traded with them for over 1,000 years. Hatshepsut and other pharaohs sent huge expeditions to Punt. This is detailed in a book found in a 3,500-year-old temple near Thebes. And even though we have a lot of descriptions of many voyages, we have not found any records with a map or even any directions so we can find the Land of Punt. So it looks like this is another ancient lost civilization comparable to that of El Dorado or even Atlantis. So the first mention of this mysterious rich place comes from the Old Egyptian Kingdom around 2500 BC during the reign of King Sihur. It's recorded that the expedition came back with 80,000 measures of what is believed to be myrrh or incense, 23,000 staves or wood, and 6,000 measures of electrum, which is a mix between gold and silver. Expeditions continued into the New Kingdom, with the last one being in the 12th century BC by Ramses III. What's really interesting, though, is that we have records of expeditions traveling south along the Nile and also starting along the Red Sea, suggesting that this place could be along the Nile and also expands eastward to the Indian Ocean, the African east coast. It's actually suggested that they prefer the route of the Nile, but only if there were friendly nations along the upper Nile south of them. Obviously, there are arguments for the location to be in Africa and on the Arabian Peninsula, but the most interesting to be is considering a nation that controlled the mouth of the Red Sea and resided on both the Horn of Africa stretching to the upper Nile and also settled along the coast of Arabia. So the last Egyptian record we have of Punt is in the 12th century BC, which also happens to coincide with the Bronze Age collapse, which we've gone over in one of the first episodes of the Iceberg. So could Punt have fallen to the Sea Peoples too? It looks relatively likely since we don't have many other records of them. Another interesting note is that the Queen of Sheba from the kingdom or queendom, it's noted in Abrahamic religious text that Sheba had a line of 60 continuous queens, was built around 1000 BC and is also described of being from southern Arabia and Ethiopia. Could people of Sheba have been the descendants of the ruins of Punt, or could they be new people settled into the ruins of that region? Sheba was also said to be extremely rich and would trade gold and spices with Solomon. I'm not saying there's a connection, but I do see a ton of similarities between Punt and Sheba, the time frame, the descriptions, the proposed kingdom and occupied lands, but they could also be completely different or just made up entirely. And number 10, the Pyramids of Argolis. These pyramids in Greece have been dated to about 2800 to 2000 BC and are located by the city of Argos. This does provide proof of the mythology that the city of Argos did in fact have relations with the civilization in Egypt. There has been some controversy around what these pyramids date back to, and some say that it even coincides with the creation of the Egyptian pyramids. Obviously, throughout the ancient world, all over the world, you see buildings of pyramids, not necessarily in the same shape or style, but at least in the Mediterranean, they share the same shape, and they also share the same pantheon of gods. Obviously, they have different names, but the similarities are definitely true. This pyramid in particular is pretty small though. It is roughly 7 by 9 meters. There are many other theories, like one suggests it was a grave or a memorial site for soldiers who died on the field and that hill. Or it was sort of a furnace or chimney and was used to send smoke signals. And the idea that it was used as a post or observatory for land around the pyramid. But like I mentioned, it's really interesting to see how all over Earth we find pyramids. It really suggests that human civilization was much more connected and intact than we generally think they were capable of. Well, that about wraps up episode 9. If you like these longer form videos where I go more in depth on each topic, let me know down in the comment section below. It's not much longer, but it definitely adds a little bit more context. As always, if you have any theories or ideas or any further research that you think would add to the conversation, definitely leave a comment. I love reading those. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. At the very least, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in episode 10.